Today we're standing at the Mount of Olives, which is a small mountain range with 3 peaks. One is called Mount Scopus, which is a great place to overlook the city and kind of scope out what was going on there. The second is referred to as the Mount of Olives, same as the name of the range, which sits directly across from where the temple was located in the city of Jerusalem. At the base of the Mount of Olives, you'll find the Garden of Gethsemane. Then the third peak is the Mount of Corruption, where King Solomon allowed his pagan wives to build altars to worship false gods. This was not just a tragedy for that day, as we'll see later in today's lesson. But now I want to take you to 1 Kings chapter 3, which is where the verse is located that we'll park on today. We'll find a really interesting story here where God offers to give Solomon anything. The Lord is going to bless Solomon in whatever way he asks, and what Solomon asked for reveals that he understands the weight of the assignment of being a faithful leader. So I'm going to read you this, but then we're going to back up and read something that gives us a clue that though Solomon had a good heart, there were some misplaced affections that wound up doing a lot of destruction to Solomon. And I think if we can identify misplaced affections in Solomon's life, maybe it'll make us brave enough to identify them in our own lives. So let's start at 1 Kings chapter 3. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night, and God said, "Ask what I shall give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant David, my father, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne this day." And if you're underlining anything in the Bible, I want you to underline uprightness of heart. Let's continue in verse 7. "And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of David my father. Although I am but a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in." And I just want to stop here and say, I love the humility that's being demonstrated in Solomon's heart, because I feel like, having just been appointed the king, I might be tempted to say something like, "Lord, thank you for giving me this opportunity. I'm just going to knock it out of the park. Here are all my qualifications that you have given me, and I'm going to utilize those strengths and those qualifications." So I love how Solomon comes to the Lord and he's like, "You know, Lord, I'm really just a child, and I don't know how to go out or come in." The NIV says, "I don't know how to carry out my duties." I think this would honor the Lord so much if we would just go to him and say, "Lord, you are the pursuit of my heart. I don't know how to do my duties. I admit that, I may have a few degrees hanging on my wall, or I may have a few years of experience under my belt, or other people may have said that I'm able to do this. But Lord, honestly, this is new to me, and I'm just going to come to you and be honest. I don't know how to do it." I think that would honor the Lord when truly we're struggling with not knowing how to do some of the assignments that we're given. Solomon's humility is what I want to emulate in my own life. In verse 8, we read that he humbly views himself as a servant of the people. "And your servant is in the midst of your people, whom you have chosen, a great people, too many to be numbered or counted for multitude." And then we see what Solomon asked from the Lord in verse 9. "Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, that I may discern between good and evil. For who is able to govern this, your great people?" And then verses 10 through 14. "It pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this. And God said to him, 'Because you have asked this, and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, behold, I now do according to your word. Behold, I give you a wise and discerning mind, so that none like you has been before you, and none like you shall arise after you. I give you also what you have not asked, both riches and honor, so that no other king shall compare with you all your days. And if you will walk in my ways, keeping my statutes and commandments, as your father David walked, then I will lengthen your days. Wow, what a profound time with the Lord, right? And in Solomon demonstrating this beautiful humility, the Lord is being so gracious and giving to him. There's a lot of affection between Solomon and the Lord, but there is this little part of Solomon's heart that has some misplaced affections. And we find it right before this interaction ever occurs. We find it if you go up to verse 3 of 1 Kings chapter 3. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David, his father. Only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. Now, you'll read a lot about this in the Old Testament, this whole situation of the high places, the high places, the high places. So I decided, I've been a Christian a long time, and I really want to better understand this, because I have to believe if this was a reoccurring problem for the people of Israel, God's people, and we're reading about it, then it has to be because God knew it would be a duplicating problem in our hearts as well. These were real people with real issues. But I think it's so that as we read God's word, it can become a mirror reflecting our own issues that we're going to have. Because these aren't just problems of the people at that time, it's a problem for people all the time. So I did a little digging on the history of these high places with the amazing theological guru we have at Proverbs 31 Ministries, Joel. I went to him and I just said, Joel, help me figure out the high places. I really want to better understand the history of them and how do they relate to us. I want us to process through some of the information from my discussion with Joel. Egyptian and Mesopotamian gods back in this day were revered for getting stuff done. The people of Egypt and the people of Mesopotamia, which includes the Canaanites who worship Baal, like we talked about in session 1, they had gods that they would go to for very specific things they wanted done in their life. And it's actually echoed in the children of Israel when they made the golden calf. You see, they were emulating what they'd seen done when they were in Egypt. I imagine the Israelites during their captivity, they observed the ways of the Egyptians and the other nations in the ancient Near East. They saw them worshiping idols, including images of bulls or golden calves. And it must have seemed like to them, wow, these countries have it all. And so it's kind of like the thing of the day. If you're going to have an issue in your life, then you go to the God that can get that issue fixed in your life. Because sometimes we just want to be able to touch the answer rather than having faith in a God who has the answer, right? And so the high places came to represent not just places of worship, but also the idols themselves. This is really about the things that we revere, that we think are actually doing something good in our lives, that we want done. And here's the thing about what we revere. We will become like what we revere. And it'll either lead to our ruin or to our restoration. So it's very important where we place our affections, where we place our reverence. If we misplace our affections, if we misplace what we really revere highest in our life, it will lead to ruin. However, if we properly place our affections on God, it will lead to restoration. I didn't realize this before coming to Israel, but Mount Moriah, where God chose to build his temple, is the lowest mountain in the area of Jerusalem. I think it's an interesting contrast that the people were always trying to build altars on the high places, in the highest mountains, following the practices of the nations around them. But our one true God, he chose a humble mountain to come to the people. I also think it points to the compassion of our God, knowing that he would require the people to come to the temple. While it still requires effort and responsibility to make the journey, once here in Jerusalem, it wasn't a steep mountain climb to get to the temple. So Solomon, as the king, was called to reorient the people around God. And he had such an opportunity to tear down the high places and to lead the children of Israel back to the truth. But he didn't do that. Ultimately, Solomon's sin here is that he idolized the affections of his wives and the people more than the affections of God. And really what we're talking about here is idolatry. Idolatry is anything we view as more valuable than God, anything we give more effort to and value more than turning to God. And that's where I personally get so incredibly challenged, because these high places were a regular part of their routine. I just want you to think about this. It's something they did as a routine pattern because they wrongly thought they could force the outcome they wanted. They could say, oh, I'm having fertility issues. Well, then I'm going to go to the fertility god. Because sometimes it's easier in our human brains to say, I've done what I can do, rather than go to the Lord and say, Lord, I'm just going to trust you to do what you're going to do. It's really us trying to take control. So here's my confession. I don't want to control things until I do. I don't mean to try and control people or outcomes until I do. And the more I try to take control, the less and less I trust God. And when I remove my trust in Him, I misplace my affections for Him. I elevate my abilities. I go to the high places, solutions of my own making, my own delusions of control, and I lower my faith in God. It's the opposite of the humility that God calls us to. He meets us as we kneel in prayer, and there He lifts our eyes to Him. We submit to Him, and He elevates our hope. Then our trust in Him grows. So now let me read the verse one more time from 1 Kings 3:3. Solomon loved the Lord, walking in the statutes of David his father. Only he sacrificed and made offerings at the high places. And this wasn't just something that happened at the beginning of Solomon's reign. This grew into a really big problem, one that's even going to be revisited in the end times, which is just so shocking to me. So I want to take you to a couple other places in Scripture where we see the multiplied impact. It was these misplaced affections that produced the fruit of control and sexual immorality that eventually led to a black mark against Solomon's legacy. And it was a pattern. Take, for example, the time and effort Solomon put into building the temple versus his own personal palace. In 1 Kings 6:38, it tells us that the temple took 7 years to build. But then in 1 Kings 7:1, it records that Solomon spent 13 years to build his personal palace. Here again is a subtle clue that gives us a glimpse into the motivating factor of Solomon and where he places his trust and security. He has great respect for the temple, but he takes close to twice the time to build his own palace. In my studies, there wasn't something that caused this time frame to be stretched out. It wasn't like there was a war or shortage of supplies. It was just that his palace was much more lavish and a display of his riches. What I'm giving attention to is what I'm giving affection to. I need to pay attention to what I'm paying attention to. We need to be honest about outward indications of inward situations. Not only was he building for himself, but he was building for his foreign wives that he was instructed to not even take in the first place. He had to make space for his misplaced affections. We need to pay attention to this in Solomon's life so we can pay attention to it in our own lives. This isn't an accusation, but rather an observation. Now let's look at 1 Kings 10:23 through 24. Thus King Solomon excelled all the kings of the earth in riches and in wisdom, and the whole earth sought the presence of Solomon to hear his wisdom, which God had put into his mind. Amazing, right? Can you imagine being known as the wisest man of your time? There was no other king like him, right? But now let's look right after that in 1 Kings chapter 11, verse 1. Now King Solomon loved many foreign women, along with the daughter of Pharaoh. And then there's this list of all the ites, all the foreign women. Let's go to verses 2 through 4. From the nations concerning which the Lord had said to the people of Israel, you shall not enter into marriage with them, neither shall they with you, for surely they will turn away your heart after their gods. Solomon clung to these in love. He had 700 wives who were princesses and 300 concubines. And his wives turned away his heart. For when Solomon was old, his wives turned away his heart after other gods, and his heart was not wholly true to the Lord his God, as was the heart of David his father. Now, skip down to verse 7. Then Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, and for Molech, the abomination of the Ammonites, on the mountain east of Jerusalem. Right here, this part of the Mount of Olives, the Mount of Corruption. You see, not only did he not tear down the high places, but he married these women who he clung to instead of clinging to the love of the Lord. He misplaced his affections. Marrying women from other countries also formed political alliances. It appears controlling his political and economic position was more important to him than wholeheartedly trusting God. He got his value system turned upside down, and the same thing can happen to us too. These wives who worshiped other gods convinced him that not only did he not need to tear down the high places, he needed to build them. And so it may seem like such a small little detail on a mountain east of Jerusalem that Solomon built a high place for his wives to worship their false gods. But this is actually a much bigger deal. The Mount of Olives is a significant biblical location, first mentioned in the Old Testament in 2 Samuel 15:30, when King David flees his son Absalom. Generations later, during Jesus' time on earth, he spent quite a bit of time here. Remember, at the base of the Mount of Olives is the Garden of Gethsemane. Jesus would often meet his disciples before going up into the city. It was also where he went with the disciples after the Last Supper, when he prayed and he asked God to take this cup from him just before his arrest. After his death and resurrection, when it was time for him to ascend to heaven, Acts chapter 1, verses 10 through 12. And while they were gazing into heaven, as he went, behold, 2 men stood by them in white robes, and said, Men of Galilee, why do you stand looking into heaven? This Jesus who was taken up from you into heaven will come in the same way as you saw him go into heaven. Then they returned to Jerusalem from the mount called Olivet, the mountain of Olives, which is near Jerusalem, a Sabbath's day journey away. Did you catch that? Scholars believe this passage implies that the King of Kings and Lord of Lords will return to this same place that they saw him go up into heaven. Now let's read Zechariah 14:4. On that day, his feet will stand on the Mount of Olives that lies before Jerusalem in the east. And the Mount of Olives shall be split in two from east to west by a very wide valley, so that one half of the mount shall move northward and the other southward. Now make note of the fact that the Mount of Olives will split in two. Geological experts acknowledge that the Mount of Olives is already set up on a fault line. So the land is set up for the fulfillment of this prophecy. So, in light of all we're studying about the earthly kings and our one true king, think of the warning and the hope that we can see from everything that occurred and will occur on this very mountain. The earthly King Solomon, through polygamy and idolatry, turned this part of the mountain into a mount of corruption, and it's still called that to this day. Also, it can be referred to as the Mount of Scandal. But when Jesus returns, the Mount of Olives will be split in two, and the reigning King of Kings and Lord of Lords will bring with him the glory of God to this place, and he will reign forevermore. Psalm 24:7 Lift up your heads, O gates, and be lifted up, O ancient doors, that the King of glory may come in. So, in this place where Solomon defiled the land, Jesus prayed to his Father, cried out to his Father, spent long moments of tender fellowship with those he loved. He returned to his Father, and then one day he will return from this very place indeed. Jesus once again provides a beautiful reversal and returns God's glory to what was defiled by Solomon's high places. It's so important for us to understand that Solomon continued to misplace his affections over and over. And a lifetime of misplaced affections does not go unnoticed. It affects us and draws our hearts further and further away from God. Friends, make no mistake, God takes this very seriously. When this mountain splits at Jesus' return, what a statement it is for the misplaced affections to be cut off. But what a powerful lesson for us to take God's word and hold it up and let it mirror anything in our heart where there are misplaced affections. God made it so clear. We are to do two things. We are to love Him and we're to love other people. And we cannot do that effectively and with as much passion as possible if we're caught up in our misplaced affections and control issues. Honestly, it just comes down to what we talked about, our feelings. When I feel empty, when I feel in need, when I feel lonely, when I don't feel important enough, when I feel small, when I feel incapable, when I feel threatened, when I have all those feelings, do I trust the Lord enough to take those feelings to Him? Or do I need something in this world to ease the ache of my disappointments and my feelings of emptiness? And boy, that really challenges me in a good way. Not in a way to feel condemned, not in a way to feel defeated in this issue, but in a healthy reminder to say, you know what? Tomorrow, when I get up in the morning, I'm going to remember this lesson. And I'm going to give my first affections, my highest affections to the Lord, and replace I need control with I trust